This is part 3 of The Reader. The next morning, as Ellery stood in the doorway of her closet, sipping at her coffee, she studied the shoe rack sitting beneath the hanging of clothes. She was still mulling over the previous day's experience, recounting the hours she had spent naked before a virtual stranger. She pushed the clothes aside and studied her cache of high heels. With the seriousness of task, she considered the shape and style of the various shoes, settling on a pair of tall, black, soft suede heels that she felt would satisfy the man's request. The day that intervened the next reading went by without much fanfare. Ellery visited one client and helped copy edit an essay for another. But throughout the day she was continually sidetracked by thoughts of what had transpired, with a kind of tantalizing anticipation of the appointment looming for the following day. Come Wednesday, Ellery took care of several reading tasks for clients during the first half of the day, but the impending second visit to the man on the edge of the city was what was capturing her fancy. She continually checked the dainty gold watch on her wrist to track the passing hours as she went from errand to errand. Back at her apartment, as Ellery was readying herself for her visit with the man, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to an older, tall, thin black man standing there, dressed in a black suit and tie set off against a perfectly laundered white button-down shirt. "Miss Shore?" "Yes," Ellery came back, wondering what the man wanted. "I'm ready whenever you are." When he stepped back and dutifully clasped his hands before him, she saw, from her perspective at the second-story landing, parked on the street below, a black Lincoln town car double-parked out front her building. As the Lincoln breezed along smoothly and quietly through the streets of the city, Ellery ran her hand over the plush leather. She felt a rush of indulgence at the thought of a private car having been procured to deliver her to read in the nude to the man in the big house. She smiled at the provocative liaison she was en route to, several titillating hours of words, of reading, of wondering. When Ellery rang the doorbell of the grand house, she listened as the muffled chimes rang through the vast home. The faint sound of approaching steps on the other side of the ornate door stirred her, raising her heart rate slightly. The big door was unlatched and swung open to reveal the man standing there. He was wearing a dark sport coat over an open white shirt and black slacks. When he saw she was wearing the black heels, he smiled approvingly. He stood to the side and made a welcome gesture with a sweep of arm. As Ellery entered, he closed the door behind her. Hearing the latch of the deadbolt shot an enticing aspect of sublime capture through her. She was now in his home, away from the prying eyes of the public, locked away here now with a provocatively clandestine duty to perform. The world outside and the banal aspects of daily life were effectively shepherded away upon entry into the timeless environs of the old house and the simple erotic nature of her presence here. When the man ushered her into the study, Ellery saw the bentwood chair had already been placed in the center of the room. With little more than a perfunctory inquiry as to how she was doing, the man settled into his reading chair, placing his elbow on the arm and resting his jaw against his knuckles. His face carried a commanding expression of expectation. It was a pleasantly nasty look that spoke of luxuriant scheming as to the personal desires of human nature. Knowing her purpose here, Ellery wasted little time. She approached the chair and turned around to face him. A mix of anxiousness and eagerness swept through her. She slowly unzipped her dress and let it fall gracefully to the floor. Demurely stepping out of the pile of material on the floor, she let the movement linger to emphasize the soft suede heels. She then unfastened her lace bra and peeled it away from her breast. In slow, sensual movement, she slid her fingers down over her body and ran them inside the elastic of her panties, pushing them down over her thighs and lifting the black-heeled feet out of them. Nude before him, she pulled her hair up and fastened, letting out the appropriate strands on either side of her face. She then took her glass case from her purse, whipped through the wire-rimmed glasses, and in calculated movement opened the ears and slid them on. Retrieving the old volume of Melville's White Jacket, she settled into the parlor chair, the bent wood frame creaking as her lithe weight settled under the crushed velvet pad. She then crossed her right leg over the left in a beautifully choreographed feminine display of obedience. She then fingered the bookmarker set between the pages of the old book and opened it across her naked lap, like a butterfly spreading its wings over the wonderful mysteries of the hidden valley between her legs. The room was then gently intoxicated with the mellifluous rhythms of Ellery's sweet voice as she continued from where they had left the story of a young man aboard a man-o'-war. In relatively short order, Ellery slipped from her self-consciousness and was able to concentrate on the beautiful language of the old novel, easing into a shared enjoyment of the story from long ago. Ellery was never far from understanding that as she read, his eyes were drinking in her nakedness, the voluptuous curves of her hips, the definition of her calves. She never took her eyes from the text as she wondered where his gaze was focused and what perhaps he was thinking. She dared to consider if at some point the scenario would prove too powerful and he would be moved to primal action, taking her right there on the floor of the reading room in a savage explosion of raw, animalistic impulse. That thought came and went as she turned the pages, the grandfather clock chiming out the passing of the time. She quashed her little whimsies, reminding herself that he had assured her he wasn't interested in sex or even oral copulation, a practice which Ellery had been told by more than one boyfriend she possessed a genuine gift for. He had made his intent clear. He simply desired to have her read to him in the nude. Over the course of reading Whitejacket, Ellery often stumbled over a word, unfamiliar with the myriad nautical terms which Melville infused his writing, such as afterguard and futtock, binnacle and garboard. At these moments, when her voice lost its sensual confidence and stalled momentarily with pronunciation, he would intervene, repeating the word properly and then describing for her, in his worldly way, what it referred to, often with a thorough description of the working aspect of the old tall ships Melville and the man were so enamored of. It was during these frequent discourses, delivered with the eloquence of his mature voice, she would fall into a kind of trance listening to him, enjoying his knowledge of such things, which he made wholly interesting to a landlocked woman such as herself. Often, he was so engaging in his descriptions that she would innocently forget for the moment that she was completely naked. After his explanation, she would take up again reading the prose from the pages of the book. The man especially liked when Ellery became so engaged in her reading, enraptured so with Melville's words and the evolving tension of the story, that she became completely unaware of her nakedness before him. It was in those precious fleeting moments that his voyeurism was fully satisfied. When the grandfather clock chimed, announcing the end of the allotted 2 hours, Ellery took a breath, sliding the bookmark into the pages and closing the old volume. She then lifted the tome from her lap, exposing the warm crevice that was the juncture of thighs and pelvis. She then lifted the tome from her lap, exposing the warm crevice that the juncture of thighs and pelvis created, and placed Melville on the table, to be picked up another day. As before, as soon as the time was up and the book closed, the man got up out of his chair and wandered off into the house, leaving Ellery to dress alone and unobserved. It was a direct contrast to the intensity of his audience when she undressed. She thought to herself, as she pulled on her panties and fastened her bra, if perhaps the act of dressing didn't carry the same excitement of undressing. Maybe the notion of dressing was indicative of an encounter having ended, a forlorn farewell, as opposed to the heightened emotions of anticipation associated with the act of undressing. As she drew up her dress around her, she studied the empty reading chair. She took off her glasses and placed them back in their case. Ellery made her way through the austere house toward the front door. She saw the man standing there, his hand on the brass knob, ready to turn the ornate handle and return her to that staid world beyond, so sadly devoid of secret intimacies. The sweet reverie of being there in the great, naughty secret with him, suspended in the dream, was at an end for now. She would pass through that door and be swallowed up into the unemotional diatribes of daily routine. As she passed within a whisper of him, close enough to catch his scent, with a momentary return to the naughty secret, his stoic face and disposition was suddenly contradicted in asking, "Do you have stockings?" His words stopped her on the threshold of the grand doorway. "And a garter?" Ellery was reassured by the question, as it revealed his desire to continue with their wonderful secret. "What color?" she asked. "Whatever you like." He smiled, well, as much as he managed to smile, which was more a slight, knowing bend of the mouth at the corner of his lips. As Ellery descended the cement porch steps, the door closed behind her. She heard the deadbolt drawn across. She made for the town car where the driver was standing at attention with the rear door open. It was all so adolescently fairy-tale-ish. The coachman, awaiting the princess to alight in the fine coach sent to fetch her by royalty in order for her to fulfill her concubinary purpose. As she settled into the plush leather confines of the Lincoln, Ellery looked up at the imposing house, wondering what the man was going to do with the rest of the day, and the day between their next visit. She wondered if he thought about her in those absences as the car pulled away to speed the concubine home.